are live. How's it going, everyone? I'm here with the special guest today, Kyle Samani of Multicoin Capital. And just for a little background, we won't go too far into context, but prior to founding Multicoin, Kyle co-founded and ran a startup called Pristine that built software for Google Glass for use of surgeons and other healthcare, which was later acquired by Upskill. And for just some context on Multicoin, we'll let Kyle get into it a little bit as well. But they're most widely known for participating in Solana's seed round. So what better fit to have Kyle on at the Mountain Dow Hacker House here building on Solana. So with that being said, we're going to jump in here with Kyle. And how's it going, Kyle?
Hey, Greg. Great to be here.
Yeah,
Mountain Dow was pretty awesome, man. I got here yesterday, and this is a fantastic venue. I think I got a bunch of cool builders. Love what y'all are doing here.
Yeah, man. You've been hot commodity around here. So great to get you on. And just to kick things off, do you want to give some context on Multicoin, how it's developed over the years, and really the role you guys play in the ecosystem?
Sure. So, yeah, I founded Multicoin in 2017 with my co-founder, Tushar. In that time, we've been through bear market, latter stages of the last bull market, obviously this current bull market. And in that time, we've kind of tried to figure out what we want to focus on. And we've discovered our kind of sweet spot as an investment firm, and that is really asset selection. So we spend all of our time reading, thinking, learning, understanding what's going on in the space, and then buying stuff that we like. We're always pretty well known for Solana, but also they've done a lot of great stuff with Graph, with Arweave, with Helium, with a bunch of others as well. Today we have a 16-person firm. We manage billions now across our hedge fund and our venture fund, and we're always looking to invest with great new entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's great. And just to keep this moving forward, you referred to it as the Web3 stack, which is this term that's been popping up, Web3. Everyone's been throwing it out. It's actually where we're starting to posture our media company towards the entire Web3 sector. How has crypto developed since you jumped in? It also seems like you've always been more of a fan of Ethereum and the stack that's been building on these smart contract layer 1 networks. So what are your 2 cents on how you're seeing this all develop and what it means for crypto?
Yeah, so I think I don't think I coined the term Web3 stack. There was a couple people who had written about it before I had, but I think we probably did the first real good illustration of what it looks like, and presented it out there. I think in the first version I did in maybe 2018, and the second version in maybe 2019. And one thing we kind of realized as we drew out the stack was just kind of watching all the teams building in and around the space. Fast forward a few years, and we've really seen, I think, a few kind of major trends. One is the world's become much more multi-chain. Obviously, the Ethereum ecosystem, Polygon, Solana ecosystem is probably being the largest at this point. And then I think the other thing we've seen is just the stack itself is so heterogeneous. So all these different pieces are being built by different teams. What's interesting is the contrast this with, let's say, iOS or Android, where you have one, pretty small group of people at Apple or Google who are making all of these decisions about the stack. Here, it's actually a pretty small number of people. This is a very large number of disparate groups who are kind of building the stack out as a whole. And that's just super exciting to us because I think it reflects the decentralized ethos of the space, and obviously lets people invest in whichever parts of the stack that they kind of most like and understand, which is also really cool.
Yeah, so building on that stack, you touched a lot on composability. I'm curious, do we see this? I mean, the layer 1 trade keeps proliferating, right? It's like the next one pops up and everyone jumps on it. Do you think these are going to start to consolidate as composability comes in? Or what does this sort of look like as the technology progresses? Currently we have bridges. I don't think that's the end all be all of composability. What do we need to get to reduce all this friction?
Yeah, so bridges will help. I don't think bridges will ever be as good or fast or inexpensive as an intra-chain transfer form. And it does. I think a lot of other people also probably agree with that statement. Maybe there's some breakthroughs, you never know, but at least based on my current understanding, there's not a real way to do that stuff better. And so given the reality that bridges will always be some sort of added source of friction, developer cost, latency cost, gas cost, they're always going to be kind of expensive. My sense is that we will start to see consolidation around a handful of chains, maybe 2 or 3. I think it's very likely Solana is one of them. And as there's more stuff happening on that chain, that creates more state for there to be stuff to happen on top of. So kind of one of my favorite kind of recent frames I've come up with to think about the problem is, right, like a blockchain is useful for keeping track of who owns which coins, basically, is what these things do. What's really interesting though about chains is that, assets rather, is that there are certain assets that actually have mathematical relationships to other assets. So derivatives are kind of the most obvious example of that, right? Where you've got funding rates, you've got leverage, obviously liquidations, all these kinds of things you have to think about. I think that what's very clear is that the more mathematical relationships you have between certain assets, the more value there is in bundling those pieces of state together. And that's what really excites us about Solana, is because everything lives in a single shard. You can make it all just work together.
Yeah, that's awesome. Makes a ton of sense. That's something I've heard a lot of people talk about, how right now everyone's just trying to figure out what blockchain is innovative and works. So you're seeing all of these spread out, but apparently, or once you get into these bear markets, you're going to see a lot of them consolidate to the most innovative as time starts to tell. And on the sense of tying back towards that Web3 stack and derivatives, what are your guys' foci on the stack, right? You have on-chain and off-chain things, but specifically on-chain, you have things proliferating like social tokens, the metaverse / NFTs, and DeFi. Where are your interests at Multicoin? Maybe a little bit of all of them.
Yeah, so we invest across all these subject areas. We have tons of DeFi stuff, a bunch of NFT stuff, and a bunch of now, I would say a bunch, but at least a handful of social token related things. So we're certainly interested in all these areas. The newest social tokens and the least developed. I would say it's also probably the most interesting as you think about product market fit. On one hand, the idea of being able to invest in a creator is quite compelling. On the other hand, it also introduces a bunch of interesting new dynamics around, are people here for the profit? Are they genuine fans? And it's going to be hard to parse those things apart. I think I'm optimistic that social tokens will be a thing, but I think probably the exact form they take is hard to know today.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And on this idea of social tokens and metaverse, they're fairly early sectors in crypto. How do these tend to play out from you seeing them?
I mean, if I have the answer to that question, I would feel a lot more comfortable with how it's all going to work. These things, you can never know everything in advance. There's always some degree of risk and unknowns. I'd say I'm very excited about bundling NFT, social tokens, and DeFi together. I think as you combine those things, you get a lot of interesting new stuff emerges. I think there's going to be a lot of people building apps that kind of leverage all of the above to do cool new things.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess what I was more getting at there is, how is Multicoin treating these things? You guys obviously have compounded massively on Solana. I imagine these metaverse social tokens, even ecosystem plays, are a much smaller aspect of your portfolio versus the Solana bet early on. Would you maybe liken jumping into metaverse and social tokens as jumping into Solana early on? Same uncertainty, or do you think the base blockchain tech layer was a little bit more obvious than some of these other?
So I think these are different forms of investing. Investing in layer ones and that kind of a thing is some function of like belief in an architecture and how things will play out over time. Investing in social tokens is what I call, it's very squishy. There's a lot of weird things that happen when social tokens hit humans, right? Like, how did the creators respond? Which creators use them? Which verticals are they in? How do the fans respond and engage? It's impossible to understand, or actually it's possible to forecast all of those dynamics ahead of time and how they'll vary across different creator communities. What's also interesting is there's certain things that, like, community, let's just say, I don't know, rap music is like a bad community for social tokens, but electronic music is good. I don't know if that's true, but let's just say it's true. What's interesting is that the wrong go-to-market strategy may be go to rap first, but maybe if you go to electronic music first, get that to work, then the rap guys say, oh, I see how this works over here, and I'm going to copy it now. And a lot of these kinds of dynamics are just really, really hard to forecast in advance. And so when we think about investing in something like social tokens, that's very what we're looking for in founders, how we think about risk is very different than when we invest in something like Solana, which we're saying, okay, look, we can examine the architectures of all of these systems, understand the trade-offs they make, and we can have conviction that this is the right architecture. So it's a very different type of risk in investing.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense because it's so nascent. You don't know which part of the sector is going to hit and take it because these things, they may start as one thing but develop into another. So almost like taking a small basket of diversified risk across these when they're so early may be the way to go on something like that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, you obviously want to size their bets accordingly because you just never know, right?
Yeah, 100%. And then moving more into this idea of venture capital and funding, how has it progressed over the years based from like original Silicon Valley tech startups versus now Web3? We're seeing different tokenomic structures. They're obviously not perfect, but there's this entire aspect of community tokens, yield farms, and emissions. How's this different? Also, what are the dangers of bringing in the community at such an early stage?
Yeah, certainly crypto environments are very different than Web2 environments. Fundraising is very different. When people expect liquidity in a token price earlier, it changes the quantity and quality of types of investors who show up in the private markets. And then, it also just changes community expectations. I can't say it's good or bad, but I'd say I'm inclined to think it's net good. There's a lot of all the rules that were written around investor protection. I think suffer from the same psychological bias that's known in humans, which is people are more scared of losing what they have than they are more scared of not winning what they could have won. Even though those two concepts, right? Like if you lose $100 or make $100, you should theoretically have the same risk tolerance or aversion in both directions. We know human psychology, people are a lot more scared of losing than they are gaining. And I think this is very much codified in investor protections rules, which make it very hard to make money and get access to asymmetric upside things, and are really designed to prevent you from losing money. I think this is a real bug in human psychology, and obviously now in investor protections rules. Giving people chances to invest in things that could be life-changing is pretty important. And look, some people will screw it up. Some people will get scammed and conned. That comes with the territory. But I think it's important to allow there to be people who can do that. We shouldn't be trying to structure all capital allocation based on the lowest common denominator. I'm a big believer that people should be able to invest their capital as they see fit.
No, I think that's really interesting how you talked about the bug in the system, that these structures and investor protection laws were written with risk aversion in mind. I've read a ton about this in Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, and he touches on these psychological effects. So the idea that it is now open, someone like me who comes from middle class, maybe upper middle class, is able to invest in these ecosystems and see these startups and get my own piece in them. It seems like really great. Also, just understanding the risks, and as regulation comes in, it'll definitely get better. But it's interesting to hear that it is a bug. So will we ever be able to break away? How will regulation come in? And I guess this kind of takes me to my next question. And I know the general answer here is this is very slow moving. We're still trying to figure out how to regulate things like proof of stake mining and those sorts of rewards. How do you see regulation playing a role in the token economy? It seems like it's 2-3 years out. What are your thoughts on how this will continue to develop?
Yeah, it's a really hard, complicated area. We spend a lot of time on it with our lawyers and other legal teams. And the short answer is we have no idea. There's a lot of things that could happen, and we don't have a particular strong view on what that will be.
Yeah, that's great. And just diving in more, I think it's great where here, obviously, at the Solana hackathon to get into Solana. How important is the infrastructure that's building on Solana, such as Serum with their central limit order book, oracles like Pyth coming on, even Solana NFT infrastructure like Metaplex? How has this really cauterized Solana as the place to build? What do you see behind this infrastructure that's different than other networks?
Yeah, I think there's a few really interesting ways to think about this. What matters in a layer one blockchain in the long run is the credible neutrality of the base protocol itself. And that's going to be a function of a few things. Obviously, how well documented and tested the code base is, how bugs have there been over time and stuff. Certainly a function of stake distribution. Obviously, a function of the number of physical validators or virtual validators, people who own assets and how much they distribute them. There's a fairly obvious set of things that lend themselves metrics to, generally speaking, increasing the credible neutrality of a system. One thing I've just thought is a little strange about the Ethereum Foundation in particular is that they really emphasize trying to maximize all of those metrics generally to be most credibly neutral. But then they also seem to hold the view of the core Ethereum Foundation itself should do very little in driving the ecosystem forward. And I think that's a real logical error. I think the fact that the core Solana team is building Metaplex and Solana Pay is really good for the ecosystem as a whole, because what that does is it provides a single shelling point. Like for Solana Pay and for Metaplex, they're both a standard. And with the problem with standards is if people don't all agree on the standard, everything is messy and then you have to interop and it's hard. But if everyone can agree on a single standard, that's great, because then the standard just works. When the Solana Labs team lends their social legitimacy, or I should say uses their social legitimacy to imbue a new standard on Solana, I think that's really powerful, because then you get rid of 1 to 4 years of kind of debate and consternation of which competing standards should we use, and everyone just agrees to use one standard. And the net ecosystem benefits you get from that, I think, are really profound. All the apps just work with each other and talk to each other, and it all just goes really quickly. We've seen the same thing with Serum, although Serum was not built by the Solana Labs team. And I think that effect of, hey, solving a base level problem with open standards, and I think everyone just come use these, I think is a very, very productive way to think about growing an ecosystem.
Yeah, that's great. And even just touching on the point of how the Ethereum Foundation runs very much like this textbook DAO. And it seems like they've just accumulated a lot of tech debt, where there's a lot of things that they've built up over time, and now it's hard to make changes, and they don't feel like there's certain things that they should change or have a role in, whereas Solana was able to come up, build on arguably better tech. We'll leave that up in the air, or maybe not, and build on this tech, and then also come in and have this driving force of, we are going to innovate on what matters. And I think a big thing about Solana is they're very focused on building the scaling and having teams come in and fill the gaps for other things. And I think we've seen that happen for certain things where they're like, look, let's very much focus on this massive problem blockchains, layer one networks have, where there's been points during this bull market where it didn't matter what network you went to, they were all congested. So it's a very apparent issue that, okay, decentralization, we need that, but is it the North Star right now when we can't even get the people inside of the crypto ecosystem all using a layer one blockchain? We want to onboard billions. So it's great to see a team really address this problem and hone in on it.
Yeah, totally agree. And I love just the focus of the Solana Labs team on doing all this stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing. And even on the idea of Solana Pay, it's great, right? Like, we have this co-working space, and now we have Solana Pay up there with the snacks. So really just incorporating people in. Not sure if you were able to check that out yet. But
yeah, I was able to buy this Topo Chico, actually.
Perfect. Yeah, and just moving forward, I think another fun one here, I just glanced at a question I had, is how is touching on onboarding to the masses, what do you think are the major touch points that will bring on this 1 billion users? I think there's a couple obvious ones, but curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the big obvious ones are NFT and gaming for sure. No really unique insights there, but there's a lot of people who've raised money to build crypto games that are going to launch this year, and a lot of creators are going to issue NFTs and stuff. So those are the two fairly obvious ones.
Yeah, 100%. And just on that idea of crypto gaming, I grew up playing games like Counter-Strike, League of Legends. I understand somewhat this skin obsession, whether I go and spend all this money on skins, it's happening. So I very much see that. What are your thoughts on just crypto gaming in general? It sounds like the sector has a lot of work to do in the sense of what's building, but there's a lot of people coming in. How do you think this sort of barrier happens between big game studios and crypto natives? Do you think this is, I mean, this might be a bad question as in how do you answer this, but is this something where crypto natives are going to be able to build these games, or game studios are going to come in, or a combination of both? I mean, we've seen studios like Ubisoft completely blow up when they tried to launch NFTs. So what are your looks on this? What do you think the gaming industry needs to do to really onboard the users? I think there's a massive issue of speculation.
Yeah, so I don't think there's I think there's a lot less product market fit on crypto gaming than most people think. There's a lot of interesting things to do with open economies in games. I think Axie kind of sparked that. And so there will be a lot of interesting stuff to happen. I think right now, probably what's happening is people are overfitting. They're trying to force square pegs in the round holes. And so, like, I think a lot of the NFTs you're seeing in some games are not super well thought out. And that's causing some of the backlash. I think if the game is really designed from first principles as an open economy, I think that's can be very interesting to run on crypto rails. The other use cases for crypto and games, I'm a lot more speculative about.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense there. And shifting a ton more on the idea of onboarding a bunch of users, what is Multicoin's outlook on crypto and Web3 in India? This seems to be like a massive topic recently. How are you guys posturing towards this? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, India's a big place. It's like 1.3, 1.4 billion people. They're obviously all going to build stuff. It seems like the Solana and the Polygon ecosystems are probably the two most substantial there. We're certainly very intrigued by it and are trying to figure out how we can be effective in that part of the world.
Yeah, that's great. And then even just jumping a little more here, we're touching a bit on decentralization versus scalability, kind of the trilemma, I think people call it. Where are we going with decentralization? I mean, some people obviously it's not too important. Some people it's more important than others. DeFi and DAOs seem extremely loaded right now. How do you think this continues to evolve? Do we ever get to like a complete decentralized aspect? I think even watching these protocols built, their businesses at some point, they need a team behind them to really bootstrap them and get them going. Just turning them to the community. When does this come? How is this done? What are your thoughts there? This one's a pretty broad and out there one for you.
Look, every community is different, and how fast you should decentralize is a function of the nature of the product, the market, and a bunch of other things. To generalize, I can generally say that I think it's important to engage your community pretty early on, and I think most teams try and do that in earnest, which is good. Beyond that, it's hard to generalize.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's just a great one because we love to throw out the term DeFi, DAOs, but it's like, okay, how much of this do we really have right now? And it's just probably one of those things as the space continues to mature, we'll get an idea of what makes sense. Another point I always like to bring up, we can't even figure out how to govern ourselves as nations and states. So trying to take this down to the granular level, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. So curious to watch that develop. And really moving forward here, in broader Solana, what are you excited to see? It seems like Multicoin is very postured towards Solana with this idea of tech and ecosystems will start to consolidate. What specifically on Solana would you like to see in the next 2 to 5 years from a more thesis-driven standpoint?
The thing that we've probably spent the most of our time on is we've invested in a handful of things recently that are not yet announced that reflect this. but that is people doing stuff in the real world that's really infused with tokens. So I think Helium is the first really good example of this. There's a few other things that will start to become public over the next few months that we think really reflect the idea of layering tokens into real world things.
Yeah, that's great. Really just trying to bridge that gap. I think right now there is that massive gap where you have the outside world and then the crypto world, and people struggle to find those ties. So it sounds interesting that you guys are looking for those bridges there. And then just in general, I know you have a hard stop coming up here, but starting to wrap things up here, there's been a ton of Solana hackathons going on. And I think this is just a testament of why we're here, why you're here, the idea that Solana is one of these chains that will continue to stay. What is your read on the hackathons and the talent coming in? Are there any notable things you've been seeing come out of these things?
Yeah, I mean, we've backed probably 10 teams that came out of hackathons. So starting as far back as Mango and Saber from the very first one. Last night I was judging for the Wormhole and Serum hackathon. And then the Riptide hackathon is going to come up here in the next couple of weeks. So, I mean, look, we have written a lot of checks into those teams, and we will continue to do more.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear that. Great to be here. And even just like the overall environment of having the builders, it really whips everyone up into shape, especially when it's like, oh, look, all these other teams are here 12, 16 hours a day doing the same thing we're doing, whether or not you have these connections back where you're from. So it's great to really see the ecosystem come together, have all of these sponsors put on these events. And I think it really differentiates Solana. Really, to wrap this up here, Kyle, I just have one last thing. And my main question is, as Multicoin, is Solana still this main idea for you guys? Do you just see one of the biggest things is continuing to compound what has worked versus changing the thesis now? What's the idea on that? I mean, it seems like I answered my own question there.
theses should not change very frequently. They should change occasionally as you get new information, but I would say all the information we've gotten in the last 12 to 24 months, sports settling down on Solana, not changing. So
yeah,
all in, let's go.
That's amazing to hear, Kyle. So we're going to wrap that up here since you have a hard stop. Really appreciate you coming in, touching a bit on what's developing on the ecosystem, Web3 stack, and all of that good jazz. So we'll tie it up here. And again, thanks for joining us, Kyle. It's been great.